Welcome to Design to Move, a weekly functional movement series revealing common movement impairment syndromes, muscle imbalances, and injury cycles and how to correct for them. Don't just exercise, but restore optimal movement. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Design to Move. My name is Ryan Maxwell. This is Ryan Parr. We're two movement specialists here at Fluid Health and Fitness. And today we're going over another movement distortion pattern. This one has to do with hyperinflated ribs or elevated ribs. A couple weeks back we did hyperinflation, the overuse of the diaphragm. This is kind of an extension of that. In fact, it's a direct extension of that, and the relationships with the ribs being lifted up because we don't have enough support from our abdominals. So we're going to talk about the relationships that pull our pelvis down, which leads to an extension in the spine and then an elevation of the ribs, and how to reduce the mechanisms that get you there. Now, if you have questions on the topic, we do have a blog on the subject in the description below, so make sure to take a look at that. We do have a table of contents to the side that gives timestamps of all of our segments with a condensed version of the video at the bottom. So if you are pressed for time, or once you watch this a couple times, you can go to that and just use it as a reference. We always offer everybody a free movement assessment. We do these videos as an opportunity to give you some basic guidance, but if you're looking for specific guidance for your body, we'd love to have you tap into the resources we offer through a virtual assessment. And you can do that by reaching us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. So once again, thanks for joining us, and let's get into our topic. So our first segment is mobility and release. Here's where we show you how to reduce the overactive muscles in the body. And for this week on elevated ribs, the ones that we're going to target, and these are just a couple, just remember there's multiple muscles that can be involved in this, but the couple that we're going to target today are the quads, and specifically the rectus femoris, and the back extensor muscles, the erectors or erector spinae muscles. Let's go. So the first muscle group that we're going to target today is the rectus femoris. This muscle attaches from your pelvis down to your kneecap. It allows you to extend the knee and also lift the hip up. So it's a flexor of the leg. And if it's too tight, because we have a tendency to shift our weight into our hips, we start to use it to help support the body or the pelvis. So a lot of times it gets overused, not to mention it gets a lot of action when we do sporting activities, running, jogging, biking, etc. So it gets tight. So we want to reduce it today. We're going to do a soft tissue drill by using a foam roller. Ryan's going to get into position by laying prone or down on the ground. He's going to position the roller so that it's offset to the side of his body. He's going to have it on the left quad. He's right in the middle of his quad, but you can start closer to the kneecap. And then his opposite leg is going to be out and abducted and flexed up towards the front of his body. Now the center of his weight through his shoulders, or I should say the center of his torso, is over his elbows, so he's supporting his shoulders and keeping a nice stable spine. He can stick this leg out a little bit further, so he's going to bring it up. That's going to bring that leg into flexion. And while he's sitting there, the weight of his leg is going to compress down onto the muscle. So basically we're pinning the rectus femoris between his femur and the roller, and that pressure is going to help to, again, tell the tendinous connection points to, again, let the tissues relax. So he's going to start with a passive release, just hold it there for just a little bit. Now again, he's going to bend the knee, going through an active release, pulling the tissue through the ball or through the roller here. Again, the kneecap is where it attaches, and then you let it go and sink down into the belly of the muscle. Now as he does this, he's going to breathe in, bending the knee. You can flex the glute at the same time, flex the quad on the right side. We're pulling the knee up towards the chest, and then breathe out and sink down and sink into the belly of the muscle. Now if there are adhesive points in the muscle, you might feel it as, again, a little knobby area as you bend the knee, and that tissue starts to pull under the roller. If it slides past the roller, don't go that far. You want to kind of block it on the roller and shear. So a lot of times, again, we'll get little microtraumas in these muscles. They're really overused. So something to keep in mind as you're going through the process. Again, we're going to let it go fairly quickly, sink into it, go through about 6 to 10 cycles. And then you can go up the length of the quad if you wanted to, up towards the pelvis, attack another adhesive point, or again, trigger point, and see if you can get, again, more length out of the muscle. Now, just so you guys know, how do we know if we have adequate range of motion through the knee? We should be able to move the knee to about 90 degrees of hip flexion or knee flexion if you're laying down on the ground and not see any displacement around the pelvis, meaning the hip shouldn't tilt down or lift up if you're bending the knees. So if you want more information on that, just reach out to us again, admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. But otherwise, this is something that you're going to want to do to loosen up those rectus femoris. Okay, let's get into the erectors. So we're going to get into our back erector muscles. If we recognize that the muscles on the front of the hips, the flexors of the hips, pull the pelvis downward, that's going to create compression into our back as the back goes into extension. Now the muscles that help keep that compression are called the erector spinae muscles. So these are muscles that, again, pull the back into extension. So if I want to stretch them, I want to pull the back into flexion. Okay, so again, if we have a deep pelvic slope or a hyperextended lower back, this would be something that you're going to want to look at. So either way, you'll see that Ryan's on his back. He's got the roller between his rib cage and his pelvis. And he's going to begin by bringing the knee up to his chest. Okay, by doing that, that's going to pull into his hip flexor. His back's going to start to flex under. And he's going to come into a crunch position and then bring his thorax on the opposite side in towards the opposite leg. So he's rotating his rib cage into the opposite leg. And then coming back down. Like so. Okay. So this would resemble gait. When this leg comes up into flexion, it's going to pull the pelvis forward. Spine's going to counterbalance that against it, come back into flexion, and that's going to lengthen through the erectors. The erectors are extensors, not flexors, right? So again, he's going to bring that down. Draw the leg up, breathe out, crunch down, rotate across the body. Looks just like a gait cycle, maybe putting some weight down into his heel on the opposite side, and then come back down, and then sink into the belly of the muscle. Okay? Feels good, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you do it right, you're gonna feel some natural lengthening of these muscles along the back. Thoracolumbar fascia is there, latissimus attachment points from your lats are there. A lot of different muscle groups and tension groups coming right into that little area. So this is something that you're gonna wanna target. You're gonna help to open up the back, not only that, but get some of that thoracolumbar fascia, start to loosen up a little bit, reduce the apex of tension there. So again, he's gonna breathe out, lift the leg up, do a little contralateral rotation from the opposite hemisphere. So right knee is coming up, left rib is coming up, pulling it together, doing that anterior oblique sling from the groin, internal oblique, external oblique, coming back down and back down to it. There it is. All right, so you could go through about 6 to 10 of these drills. I always like to start with some passive strokes, just kind of up and down. Again, when you're on your back, be careful of your ribs, be careful of the floating ribs, the lower ones. Again, you don't want to push too deep on those. There's not a full attachment point there. They're held together by soft tissue. So make sure to protect it. And again, you can try both sides of the body. You'll notice most likely that there's going to be more tension on one side over the other, because we're asymmetrical a lot of times. So either way, take it slowly, test it out, do it on both sides of the body and see how you feel. And that brings us to the end of our mobility. Our second segment is called activation. Here's where we actually show you how to target muscles that are traditionally underutilized or they can't facilitate the right movement pattern in the body. So when it comes to the ribs being elevated, part of the muscle groups that hold them down are the external obliques. So we're going to show you how to target those with a band rotation from a split stance position. So guys, we're going to start with an activation of the external oblique. This is a muscle that pulls the rib inward. So you have your internal oblique that tips the body to the same side. The external oblique rotates the trunk to the opposite side. So if I'm on my right side, it rotates my torso inward. Now you're going to see that external oblique come into play when you're going into gait when the opposite leg comes up into flexion. So as I lift my leg up, my external oblique on the opposite side would flex. And that's going to help to create stability for my pelvis and my back and my braced leg on the ground. Okay? So again, if my hip flexors, like my rectus femoris, like we reduced, are too tight, it could have, again, a tipping influence on the pelvis and create an inhibitory effect on that muscle. So you don't get a strong enough impulse out of it. Now you'll see that as, again, excessive rotation on that back leg where the rib will open up with the pelvis because it's not strong enough to help hold it as we go through our gait cycle on that braced leg. Okay, so pretty important that we get this under control because it leads to excess rotation through the pelvis and the spine. Okay, so Ryan's going to show you how to do this by going into a split leg position. He's going to step back with his right leg He's gonna be rotating, activating his right external oblique. So he's gonna start by bracing through his hip, so his glute is flexed on the right side. He's gonna create a little bit of pressure by pushing back through his heel, pushing his left leg forward, just like he was about to take a step forward into his left leg, okay? We'll know that his hips are neutral because his ilium, or the hip bone on the right side, isn't rotated out externally, so you're not gonna see this, and again, the rib wouldn't be rotated out with it. So he's gonna clench his glute, hold his leg there, make sure that the angle of his foot is nice and straight, so his foot shouldn't be rotated outward, it's right in line with his heel. And again, he's gonna push through the band by pushing through the trunk, not the arms. His arms are isometrically stabilized through the shoulders. Scapula is being retracted back on the left, and he's just bracing through his palm on the right, breathing in and then breathing out, and slowly coming back to a neutral stance where his ribs or his collarbone lines up with his pelvis. Okay, so he's gonna breathe in, push. Remember, he's pushing back through his right heel so he can feel his right glute. Might feel some pressure on his groin on the left side, and then he's gonna breathe out and slowly come back to a neutral alignment. Goal here is to breathe in deeply so that you get that diaphragm on the right side to try to open up that external oblique, but you're gonna co-contract both of those guys and slowly come back down to a count of 6. So we're gonna wanna go through 2 sets of 20 repetitions, 2 count breath in, hold the glute, hold the oblique, breathe out, count of 4 to 6, get all the air out of the lungs, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing. And then that would be the wrap. Okay, so 2 sets, 20 repetitions, give yourself a minute of time in between, and you can do both sides of the body. Make note one more time that if your glute starts to let go, your hip's gonna rotate out, or the foot's gonna rotate out, you're not gonna get as strong of an impulse on that external, and again, it's going to lead to more tension being exerted on the hip flexor that we try to reduce. So hopefully you guys will get it down. If you have questions, again, reach out, admin@fluidhealthfitness.com. Let's get to our integration. Third segment is called integration. Here's where we show you how to take multiple muscle groups and get them to sequence or fire in the right order so that you can move efficiently. And this one has to do with the diaphragm, the abdominals, and the appendage movement around the torso and through the pelvis by doing a 4-point position on the ground with, again, an alternating extension bilaterally. So we're gonna get down on the ground for this one. So for integration, what we're gonna do is get into a 4-point position. This is kind of a quasi-plank. Getting into this inverted position is gonna basically put the weight of your organs into your abdominals, so it's gonna force your abdominals to fire. Now that's an important thing because we wanna, again, support the abdominal pressure while getting some back extension and getting the legs and arms to move around the rib cage and in the pelvis. So this is a way of prepping our body for functional movement when we're upright. So it's like a crawling position. It's just like a baby. We start on our backs. We do this crawling baby thing where we flip over and then go into crawl, and then that prepares us for what? Upright ambulation or gait. Okay, so it's basically regressing that whole process down and making the movement smaller so we can feel the mechanisms of the intrathoracic intra-abdominal pressure supporting the thoracolumbar canister while the arms and legs move as they should around a braced canister. Okay, so Ryan's gonna do that by getting down on all 4s. Main thing, first off, getting a nice neutral spinal alignment. So his head is in a little bit of an extension here. He's got a nice lordotic arch in his cervical, a nice lordotic arch in his lumbar, a nice little rounded arch on his thorax. So again, that's a nice S curve through the spine. We call that neutral. And then what he's gonna do is he's gonna brace here through his pelvis and his torso by going into a dual extension bilaterally. Extension means behind you, so he's gonna stick his leg behind him. Let's start with the left leg. Yep. Leg kicks back, he's flexing his glute, and then he's gonna shift his weight to his left palm, breathe in, protract through the shoulder, engage that same external oblique that we talked about when we were just working through that activation, and then retract and depress the scapula on the opposite hemisphere. Once again, this resembles what our body would look like in the mid-stance phase of gait. So he's gonna breathe in and then breathe out slowly, let his arm come back down to the ground, let the scapula glide back into its natural rested, depressed position on the back side of the body, and then kick up again. Breathe in, push through the shoulder, Protract the shoulder around the rib, keep the external oblique engaged, flexing the left glute, retracting the right shoulder. Head is slightly oriented to the left with his head in line with his trunk. And then he's gonna breathe out, slowly coming down to a count of 6. Now he's gonna go through 2 sets of 20 repetitions, again with about a minute of time in between, and then that should give him enough time to recover before we get into our strength exercise. Last segment is strength. Here's where we overload the muscles that are normally weak, that need to be strong, or generally stiffer all the time. Here's where we're going to show you how to target the internal oblique by doing a marching position. It's going to activate all your abdominals, but we want to focus on the internal oblique portion, the muscle that tilts you to the same side, helps stabilize the pelvis and the rib cage. And we're going to do that again from a dual leg marching position. We're going to do that again from a dual leg marching position. Let's get to it. Last exercise is strength, and here's where we're going to go into a dual leg march. Basically, we're letting the leg come up and down, and it's controlled by this eccentric stretch of the internal oblique. Okay, so if we get into, again, a bent leg position, these are gonna be bent. Arms are down on the ground. He's got his scapula in retraction. His arms are nice and depressed, so he's not internally rotated. Chin's not shrugged up, and so he's got his head down. His eye line's in line with his collarbone. What we're gonna do is let one leg go down at a time. So the flexors of his leg are pulling down on his pelvis and trying to open up his abdominals. He's controlling that by breathing out as he lets the leg come down against that tension, and then breathe in as he lifts it up. So again, we're gonna breathe out slowly. 4, 3, 2, 1, and then breathe in and lift the leg back up into flexion. Okay, so by doing this, we're teaching the body how to contain the pressure of the flexors as they exert themselves on the pelvis and spine by engaging the abdominals and holding that abdominal pressure. Now that's important because if they take over, watch what happens to the ribs. They hike up. So a lot of times it's not just about isometrically holding the abs down and flexing the ribs down, it's about being able to control them while they're in action. That's why we want to make sure that we recognize the mechanisms that lead to the dysfunction over time. Really easy for us to do this in isolation when we know what we're talking about, when we don't have any distractions, but what happens when we're upright? So this would look like, let's put one leg down, walking. So if one leg is coming down and it's stretching that oblique and pulling the pelvis down, that could have an inhibitory impact on that opposite side and reduce your ability to maintain lumbopelvic hip stability. Now that means that the legs are going to move irregularly. It's going to put a lot of pressure on the knee, a lot of pressure on the spine, and then lead to pressure into the neck as it carries up the kinetic chain. So pretty important that we maintain specific relationships here as we're doing this. Ribs want to stay depressed. Legs are going to come down controlled. 4, 3, 2, 1. We don't want to see an external rotation of the femur. The toe shouldn't rotate out. There shouldn't be, again, a big abduction of the hips. And again, we don't want to see the lower back come off the ground or go into extension because we're containing it with the abdominals. And last thing, the head shouldn't crane up. If you see that, let's get maybe a couple of towels, put it under your neck or a pillow or something to help take the pressure off those cervicals that are trying to pull your neck forward, the deep cervical flexors or the scalenes and the sternocleidomastoid. Either way, 2 sets, 20 repetitions, slow controlled eccentric, a more contracted or a more forceful concentric flexion of the leg up, and that's going to help you to get stronger abs and more stability around the pelvis. So today we focused on elevated ribs. This is an issue that normally has to do with the inability of your abdominals to hold your ribs in a fixed position, and it's a relationship that has to do with the spinal alignment because the pelvis has a tendency to want to tip forward. Now, a lot of times it also has to do with overactive pectoral girdle muscles or the muscles that attach your ribs, your first rib, to your neck, like your scalenes, or the sternocleidomastoids that attach the collarbone to the neck, or even the pec minor that attaches the ribs to the collarbone or through the scapula, through the attachment there at the AC. So this is just a system of dysfunction or distortion that we targeted, having to do with the flexors and the lower back muscles, but there are other groups involved that could help to get those rib cage down. So make sure to look at the other video tutorials that we have out there if you want more information, or again, reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. We did write a blog on the topic, so remember it's in the description below, so make sure to read that. And again, if you want to reach out and do a virtual consultation where we can do a full body analysis and biomechanical screen, we'd love to do that. So just reach out again at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. As always, your body's designed to move, so stay in motion. We'll see you next week for another episode, and you guys stay with it. Talk to you soon.